Welcome to episode 2 of the Nuggy Guys podcast. I'm Sid, and I'm joined by my co-hosts Pat and Doug. Today, Patrick will be doing a presentation for us.
So today, I want to talk about what you, orange juice, and hippies from the 60s have in common. And that is, you all have psychedelics. Specifically, you and orange juice both contain the psychedelic DMT, and the hippies also, well, they contained it, but they like to use it. Of course, DMT isn't the only psychedelic substance. More than 200 species of mushrooms contain psilocybin. And of course, there's LSD, made famous by the Beatles, the absolute worst people at playing Clue ever. That's only a few dozen of the substances that are very different chemically, are found in different parts of the globe, are consumed many different ways, and all give roughly the same effects. Basically, to the best of my not first-hand knowledge, they allow you to tap into your unconscious, or they transport you into another dimension, or they connect you to a different plane of being. It's actually very hard to figure out what's going on, and that's what I want to talk about today. Most people, when taking small doses, experience visual and possibly auditory changes, such as seeing intense colors and geometric patterns. They also feel euphoric, appreciate life more, and sense spiritual enlightenment, which I find that's a very fascinating thing for them to say. Bigger doses tend to make you hallucinate so completely that you enter another realm. It's called achieving breakthrough. If something goes wrong, you can take a so-called bad trip and be overwhelmed with negative emotions instead of positive ones, and surprise, surprise, that can lead you to suicide. But the most fascinating thing about these trips is that you may meet psychedelic entities, as they're called. These are beings that are apparently conscious, want to be interacted with. And there's many different kinds of these. The most typical one, the most reported on one, is machine elves, sometimes called clockwork elves. They're friendly, engaging, almost childlike figures, and they really, really want to have a relationship with you. Giant beings like praying mantises or other insects are also common. Gray aliens, which I could not find very much description of, and goddesses have also been seen by multiple people. But everyone agrees that these beings are hard to describe and don't necessarily remain in one form. However, they seem to be distinct. Like, you wouldn't mistake talking to machine elves with talking to gray aliens. Do you guys have, any questions about psychedelics yet?
So, I don't know if you researched this, but what part of your brain becomes hyperactive when on psychedelics, or what parts shut down to allow for this so-called trip or hallucination or whatever's going on?
Well, there's a bit of an argument about which chemical receptors these actually are tickling, supposedly. Okay. I don't know which region of your brain that is. Yeah, supposedly the prefrontal cortex is mostly what is stimulated. Do you have any questions, Doug, that you wanted answered before I start asking you all questions?
I was just curious about the legality of... Obviously, most of these are illegal, but not all of them, or...
I believe they're all considered Tier 1 substances, and so they're all completely illegal.
Okay. Which,
fascinatingly enough, that technically makes the orange juice industry a drug enterprise.
Okay, so, orange juice. What would be a comparable... first off, where does the DMT come from in the orange juice? Is that's in the oranges naturally?
Yes, it's naturally in oranges. Well, here's the thing. DMT is considered the hallucinogenic substance because it occurs in many different plants. It occurs in the leaves of the orange trees. It also occurs specifically in their seeds, but also all throughout them. And it is very hotly debated how much of this your body makes. How much does your brain make?
So this DMT is already naturally occurring in some form in your body.
Yes.
Interesting note. I didn't do a lot of research, but the research I did would indicate that some psychedelics, or a lot of psychedelics, contain DMT for your body to utilize, while others could actually stimulate the release of DMT by your body, cause your body to synthesize or release more. I'm not sure which. Now, you can argue what is technically a psychedelic versus what drugs may not fall under psychedelic category.
And psilocybin is differentiated from DMT. They're two different psychedelics.
Yes, they're two completely different chemicals.
Okay.
And if you go look at the chemical drawings of the different psychedelic chemicals, they are completely different. Okay. That's one thing that baffles me the most about psychedelics, is that the chemicals are not even close to the same, most of them.
Interesting.
But they all do the same thing, roughly. Now, some of them obviously so if you're doing shrooms and you're getting that
Psilocybin.
Yeah, whenever you're hitting that psilocybin, it tends to produce a less intense trip than DMT does, but a longer lasting. So they all do have like slightly different effects, and some seem to affect your like auditory more than your visual. So it's not like all identical effects, but all roughly the same.
Do you know what the dose of DMT in an orange or an orange juice is as comparable to a typical dose?
No, I haven't found a figure on like what the
like
average
obviously
is.
people aren't drinking orange juice and going on a trip.
No, it's like next to none, but it is sort of hilarious that like technically Fanta or whatever. Wait, who's the biggest producer of orange juice?
Like Sunny D maybe.
Sunny D is
That does
technically a
not
drug
contain-
empire.
Does not contain juice, I don't think.
But
Sunny D is like,
or Tropicana or whatever.
well, it may depend where it's made. Like some other countries have significantly more orange juice concentrate or content in their orange juice than something like Sunny D.
Tropicana, the drug empire. Like that's what I find hilarious. It's
that is funny.
Making a point about drug laws is that like in 1970s or whatever, we just outlawed every single little bit of it, and we wrote the laws saying that any amount of the substance counts as just the substance. So
Technically they're breaking laws.
Yeah, but nobody cares because it's not actually enough to do anything to you.
The DMT used in say psychedelic therapy, the doses, is that through the mouth ingested or an injection?
So there's different ways to do that, but often for the most intense DMT experiences, you smoke it.
Oh, you smoke it. Okay. Where are they synthesizing this DMT from? Are they like distilling it from oranges, or how does there's obviously other natural sources for DMT, isn't there?
Yeah, like there's plants all over the world. I believe I actually should look this up for sure, but I'm pretty sure if you go to the Amazon rainforest, there's two very specific plants, can't remember their names, that if you take both of them and I think you have to like cook them together in a specific way, and then if you drink it, it makes like a sort of like psychedelic tea. And people wonder like, how did these natives ever discover that you have to do these two specific plants that don't even grow anywhere near each other to get these psychedelic experiences? And the natives claim that they learned about this from dreams, which is really interesting because the closest thing to a psychedelic experience supposedly is lucid dreaming.
Interesting.
That's really fascinating.
So you are, what's the word I want? Like you're still in control of yourself while you're on a psychedelic trip, or?
Yes. What is especially interesting about psychedelics and lucid dreaming is just like in lucid dreaming in psychedelics, you can talk to these people if you want to.
Entities
you can talk to the
trip.
entities in the trip. And you can also sometimes get confused whether or not you're on the trip.
Fascinating.
Because it's in some ways more real than the real world.
Okay.
Which I find like slightly worrying. I'm not sure about that.
So keep in mind the real world is only your perception of reality.
That's the real question.
And so you're essentially saying that most people's perception of reality can actually be less intense than the perception of reality that you have when you're on a psychedelic trip. Possibly because you're just dumping chemicals to your brain and overstimulating or understimulating certain parts that would normally be behaving differently.
And here's one question I wanted to ask you. Like, you all research psychedelics somewhat. Do you think you are looking inwards or outwards when you're doing psychedelics? Like, are we just seeing, I would tend to say you're tapping into the unconscious because it's so much like lucid dreaming that you're tapping into your own unconscious, seeing how it works, seeing things that are in there. Or do you think you're actually, because these are across all kinds of people and they all have the same experiences, roughly, and they all can talk to the same entities, and they're doing research right now, I believe in London, on whether or not if you give people psychedelics at the same time and get them to take basically identical trips, they can talk to each other.
In the psychedelic universe?
Yeah.
Is that the right terminology?
Roughly. No one really knows what it is.
I like that thought. That's
It's not proven that you can yet, but it's an interesting experiment. We'll see in probably just a year or so if that works.
So Your question about inward versus outward, what are you looking at? I would say it's probably inward, but I think there again, it's all about how you perceive things. So the way I perceive something could be completely different than the way you perceive something, but we describe it the same way, potentially. Take, for instance, colors. You can't prove, okay, prove is a very, it's a very questionable verb, because you can technically not prove anything ever, and that may sound controversial, but we won't get into that now. But you can't prove that the color blue that I'm seeing is perceived by my mind the same way that you perceive the color blue, right?
100%.
It's just we both perceive the color in our own way and visualize it in our own way, and we both have the same name for it. But there's really no way to compare side by side what blue looks like in my head versus in your head. So potentially, if people are seeing similar entities, I don't know. I mean, this is just one theory, and I may come up with 5 more over the course of the show. But I mean, possibly they're discovering fundamental emotions or visualizing fundamental emotions, fundamental concepts. Virtually all cultures have a concept of God. And you could even argue that some of the ones that, not necessarily cultures, but people who are, like, say, atheists who deny the existence of God, worship the universe, which in turn is their concept of God. I wonder if some of those are fundamental things God built into our subconscious. Possibly like instincts are built into animals, throw a puppy in the water, it can swim, right? Even humans, whatever.
Throw a baby in the water, it works.
Throw a baby in the water, and it can not particularly swim, but it paddles to try to not drown.
Important note, pull it out. After the experiment's done.
Maybe just don't throw your babies in the water. Maybe. I think history goes to show that that's never a positive thing. So I would say maybe it's embodying, or we're giving personalities, characters, and envisioning fundamental concepts. I don't know though. That's a fascinating thing that so many people see the exact or similar entities and beings.
I guess my question is then, so if we're arguing that it is the subconscious, it means that we basically all have roughly the same subconscious, which, okay, sort of makes sense. But then what I find very fascinating about that is then my subconscious knows a lot of things, which we all agree that it does, that I can't know, but then when I interact with it, I can know, and then I get very confused about which part of me is me.
Sure.
Well, it's all part of you, though. It's just a part of you that is accessible by yourself and a part of you that isn't, and I'm not sure if that makes sense.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Specifically, I'm thinking like instinctual fears or something that can be programmed into your subconscious. Like if you have long-standing beef with a person and they walk into the room, you may not even have a negative thought about them necessarily, but you have a negative emotion immediately, right? You see a person, an object, maybe you have PTSD from something, you hear that sound, and it causes some powerful emotion, some powerful feeling, not because you thought of it, but it was your subconscious, and it knew.
Yeah, that's true.
And you could argue, this can go so far, you can get into how animals can predict people, or so-called predict people's deaths. Like hospitals that might have a cat, and sometimes there's a hospital, I don't remember where, they had this cat, and said cat would often go to a patient's room and comfort them in their final hours. And the staff noticed this, like this cat shows up and stays with people in their final hours, even if people didn't, these people may have been on hospice, so they were known they had a short period of time, but somehow this animal sensed that they were going to pass within a day or so, and came in and comforted them. I mean, you could argue the animal was poisoning them. But I don't think there's any good indication of that. So
I don't trust cats.
Well, that's true. You can take this really far, but sometimes there's instincts. There's things that we don't know. Like, we can't enter our subconscious necessarily. Dreaming, chemical trips could be some of the closest we can get. And there's things there that I don't think we understand or know to this day. And I think God created it to be that way. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, according to Reddit, oranges contain 0.04 milligrams per kilogram of DMT.
It's very small.
Very questionable.
Questionable people saying questionable things on the internet. Somewhat like us.
Exactly. I guess my biggest question is also psychedelics can help you lucid dream. I am really fascinated by the fact that these two things are supposedly so closely interconnected. And I can't lucid dream. It'd be fun to. I'd like to learn how.
So scientifically, can we define what a lucid dream is?
So a lucid dream is a dream in which A, you know that you are dreaming. Now that maybe you do not have to meet that condition per se, but I think you pretty much always have to meet that condition. And B, you can to some degree influence events in your dream, or at least how it plays out. It's not like you actually control your dream. You can't say character A goes here, character B goes there, but you can maybe play yourself. Okay. And you can also often talk to the entities in your dreams.
So I would say the closest I've ever come to lucid dreaming, and this is actually not super uncommon for me, is when I'm falling asleep, particularly I would say naps or falling back to sleep at night if I woke up and was awake for a while. There's times that I know I'm close to falling asleep because thoughts are running in my mind and they go from logical and making sense to just completely illogical. I know they don't make sense. I know I'm going to wake up in the morning and say, wow, that was a really bizarre thought train. You just went from, one subject, say a tennis ball, playing tennis, to monkeys eating bananas and flying or something.
Perfectly logical.
But it all made sense, and the thought train was there, even though if I told anybody else or even myself in the morning, it's just completely bonkers. There's no logical connection, but my brain went from one to the next. And I've come to recognize that as a sign that I'm about to fall asleep, and if I can let those thoughts continue undisturbed, I can fall asleep. If I start analyzing my thoughts too much, I actually wake back up, and good luck, it might be another 30 minutes before I'm ready to fall back asleep.
So are we saying lucid dream is not something that necessarily happens naturally? You have to cultivate it or learn the skill?
You can.
I think it can happen naturally, but you can cultivate it.
Yes, but also if you study lucid dreaming and you practice some techniques, like if you write down your dreams, if you try to be involved in your dreams, like if you set alarms to wake yourself up, let's say every hour or whatever, whenever you think you go into REM sleep, so that you wake up in a dream, you still remember it a little bit, think about what you want to do, fall back to sleep.
Yes.
And then often, I've had that happen just naturally, like I woke up, thought about a dream, thought, oh, I should do this, fell back to sleep, and I actually did it, and then the dream played out in a better way. So there are some techniques to cultivate lucid dreaming. And then also people, often after they use DMT, they will start lucid dreaming. Or maybe...
Interesting.
Maybe only have one or two experiences of it, I'm not
sure.
sure.
Maybe
when not on DMT, they will start lucid dreaming. Like they'll unlock the ability. Interesting. So you create neural pathways, potentially.
I'm not 100% sure that this continues for like weeks afterwards, but like maybe the first few weeks after using DMT, you'll lucid dream at least to some degree. I don't know how long this continues. Like I don't know if that unlocks it for the rest of your life or not. I also don't know if you can lose the ability to lucid dream.
So maybe psychedelics are activating a part of your brain that is otherwise dormant except for in dreams, specifically lucid dreams. Is that a valid assumption?
I would say it's a valid assumption.
That dreams and hallucinations are controlled by the same part of your brain.
That's sort of what I would take away. Now, I'm not a researcher, but
that seems logical.
Okay, here's what would be interesting. I'd like to on hallucinogenic substances.
Yeah.
Because he can lucid dream.
I'm pretty sure I have, though. If that's the requirements for a lucid dream, I'm pretty sure I have.
I have already had dreams where I knew that I was dreaming. Yes. But it was usually just as I was waking up, or maybe just going in.
I'm pretty sure I've had dreams where I knew I was dreaming and I could control what I said, at least. Not what I did, but what I said.
So as far as the neural pathways go, and possibly unlocking new neural pathways that you would not have unlocked otherwise without, taking said hallucinogenic, it just makes me think about special needs children and how they often have neural pathways that are not unlocked. And if you can find ways to unlock those, say through physical stimuli, mental stimuli, audio, visual stimuli, whatever it is, they can gain higher levels of functionality. I'm not proposing that psychedelics give you higher levels of functionality. I'm just saying it's fascinating. It sounds similar to special needs children having unlocked or being capable of being trained and unlocking new neural pathways that they should have formed often as a baby, some of the fetal movements and whatever all.
As a kid, I was always more into fatal movements, but
Particularly against me, as I should recall.
hey, cannot affirm nor deny any of that stuff. Now, that would be research I would like to see done. I don't know that it is being done. Like, can we see a lot of the research being done with psychedelic medicine right now tends to deal with depression, PTSD, some psychological disorders. I sort of wish we'd put him on something like that, see if it'd fix him, because it helps it prevent insomnia. A lot of those things are what's being researched right now. A lot of highly functioning people and geniuses and whatnot do at least microdose some form of psychedelic. So like maybe it makes you better in general.
So I would argue like these so-called geniuses are nerdy, and
Valid.
microdosing may not necessarily increase your ability to function as a normal human. If you want to have a lot of really wild outside the box ideas, it would probably help with that. But for daily life functions as so-called normal people on the planet, I don't think it necessarily would boost that. My point is you're not shooting to be the next Albert Einstein, or maybe you are, and if you are, maybe you should try some microdosing, some things, but I don't really think that's the goal here.
But doesn't it stand to reason that if I'm depressed and I got PTSD and whatnot, and it makes me back to a normal human, roughly, like it improves my mental state, why not, if I am a roughly normal human, whatever the world that means, it could like sort of elevate my mental state.
Yeah, so I'm not saying I'm anti it as a treatment for things like major depressive disorder or a lot of, I don't know how it would go into personality disorders. I think that's a different category than actual mental disorders. But I think it'd be a good thing, kind of like electrical shock treatment. There's, limited research, limited data, but there does seem to be like some people have definitely been benefited from electrical shock treatment, not necessarily everybody. And I think that does some of the same things as far as possibly generating new pathways in your brain, and helping reprogram your brain in a beneficial way.
On the personality side, we know it doesn't like treat narcissism or whatever, because a lot of gurus or cult leaders will use it and use it on their followers too, because it puts you, if you're the healer or whatever who's dispensing these substances to people, what it also sets your brain up for is that you can often develop like a great attraction to that person, or like you see them as almost like a godlike figure because they give you these experiences. And so it sort of like naturally plays into people's sense of ego and narcissism, because then they're like, oh, all these people believe me to be like giving them all kinds of rapturous experiences, so I must be great. And the people are like, oh yeah, you're definitely great, like you're literally a god. And then it can lead to like these almost cult followings. So I don't think it treats personality disorders, at least not in that way.
Yeah, I agree. The difference between personality disorders versus mental health disorders, I think fundamentally, and obviously I'm not a scientist or a doctor or anything, so this is not research data, but from what I know of that, personality disorders are different fundamentally, so much that mental health disorders would be treated in a whole different method, and maybe more of an actual misfunction of the brain, whereas personality disorders, to dumb it down, are more somebody intentionally or unintentionally misusing their brain. Not so much that their brain is hardwired wrong, but that they have chosen to use it wrong, or from past circumstances have been taught to use it wrongly.
Sort of like a Faustian deal with the devil kind of a thing.
I don't know what that is.
Well, yeah, never mind what that is. But like where you know something isn't right and you're like, I don't really care. I'm willing to accept the evil in this because it gains me something. Now, I guess my other big question is, what do you think about the ethics, and I don't know the word ethics, the morality of using psychedelics? Do you think, like, should we treat them, like, this is very unresearched, and this is part of the reason it's coming out now, because we basically just banned researching them in the 60s and 70s, because we were like, ooh, that's weird, we don't trust that at all, which, fair enough, it is really weird. Like, do we treat them just like any other drug and be like, even though people claim to have spiritual experiences with them, we don't think they're actually spiritually enhancing or lead you into contact with spiritual powers?
Okay, so that's a really, really loaded question. And obviously a lot of this is just speculation and opinion and things, but I think the spiritual realm is the true spiritual realm is shadowed from us by God because he didn't want us to be able to see it. It wasn't beneficial for mankind. His purpose for mankind was not for them to be a strictly spiritual being.
True.
He made them spiritual beings, but he also made them not spiritual beings, and originally he did not give them a sense of good and evil. Everything was pure and everything was good because they didn't know the other reality. And then because of man's fall, they came to know the other reality, which is bad and sin and all these other things that we call it, but is fundamentally evil. So I think the things that God hid from us, and you can take this too far and you can say, well, principles and laws of science God hid from us, but he didn't hide them from us. They're discoverable. But I think there's some things hidden by God that are not made to be uncovered by us. However, I would be slow to believe that psychedelics actually reveal legitimate spiritual things to people. Obviously, I've never done them. Can't speak from personal experience, but I don't believe the beings you see, the things you see while on this psychedelic trip are actually legitimate spiritual beings and things. I believe they're more constructs of your mind.
Okay, is that sort of your take, Doug? Like, what do you think of that take?
I think you put that well. Like, I think it is just an exploration of your mind and of parts of your mind that you haven't explored yet, either because you don't want to or because you can't. If that makes sense.
That's fair, and I actually I'm pretty well in your boat, but to play devil's advocate here for a little bit, you said the reason that everybody can see the same entities is not exactly that they're real in the spiritual sense, which is an odd way to say it, but that they're all part of a subconscious that we share. Is that right? Is that basically what we're arguing?
So as far as if I believe the reason people see similar spiritual entities is because it is the spiritual realm that I believe in. That's really tricky. I would say no. From my personal standpoint, I think no. I don't think that is the actual spiritual. And some of that is based on the knowledge that we have from God's holy word of what the spiritual realm is. There is not a lot, and it's pretty bizarre. And if you read the book of Revelation, and some of that can have to do with if you're pre-millennial, post-millennial, or all millennial,
or just a millennial in general,
or just a millennial in general, like we are not.
Proudly not millennials here, by the way.
Right, exactly. The spiritual world, spiritual warfare described there, even the possibly physical things described there are pretty wild, but I don't think their description particularly matches these descriptions by these people who took these spiritual trips. And I think one way you can determine is it fundamentally good or bad. I think it can be used for good, like medical marijuana. Can definitely have some good benefits for people who need it. But I think the question is, from a moral standpoint, do I believe it's a good thing? Not particularly. Am I saying it would be a bad thing to try one time? No, not necessarily. I mean, obviously somebody has to try it to find out, probably. But I think, does it better your physical life? Do I feel like it would better me as a person, particularly me and taking care of my responsibilities? All of us have responsibilities, and would it enhance my ability to fulfill my responsibilities to live? And I think the answer is probably not. Certainly frequent tripping, probably not. You could argue that maybe it would increase your spiritual well-being or some level of your spiritual relationship with God, and I'm not saying that is not possible, but I don't think it would enhance it. Kind of like smoking or vaping does not enhance your physical well-being and your physical or spiritual life. There's no real upside. You might feel better for a little bit, but then soon it's just you're feeling yourself, and the only way to feel yourself is if you're doing these chemicals to keep you feeling yourself. It doesn't actually improve your overall ability to take care of things.
Do you have any take on that, Doug? Or
so if we can assume that it is not in any way contacting the spirit world, is there any other moral or ethical implications as to why we should not take it?
I would say the main one being you could take a bad trip and then that
screw yourself up.
Yeah, it's a little bit like taking any
Gotcha.
other drug. There's always the off chance you react to it badly and then you die. In this case, you might commit suicide or something.
So one thing we haven't really discussed is, do we think it's contacting the wrong spiritual entities? And
But you said it wasn't contacting any.
I don't think it's contacting any. I'm not going to say you couldn't contact the wrong spiritual entities, particularly if that's what you were trying to do.
Well, you could also say
I
this
think-
way. If you delve into your subconscious looking for ways to be evil, you better believe you're going to find some ways to be evil.
Yeah.
Yes, I can agree with that statement. I think some of it the outcome of your trip and what happens can definitely be determined by the motives for the trip. So maybe a better question is there actually a good, positive motive to do psychedelics? And something like if you have a mental disorder that could possibly be cured by it, then that would be justifiable cause to potentially try it, in my opinion.
I'm on board with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I guess for me, I'm just still wondering about like the implications of like, what if, like, could you use it like you're feeling down a little bit? Like people will sometimes take emotional support meds, basically. That's not what they call them, but it's basically the reason they're doing meds. It's because like their emotions swing too much, whatever. You could also use psychedelics for that.
So there's different. I mean, you call them emotional support meds, and that's great. But some people take meds to boost their mood, right? Mind-altering medication to boost their mood, like street drugs. Some people take things like lithium to actually possibly lower their mood swings, maybe potentially help control their mood swings more and make them more normal in a way that would seem to me like it's destimulating them. I don't actually know if it destimulates them, but it seems to because they stop doing all this wildly erratic stuff. So I think there's maybe a difference between potentially trying to destimulate somebody who is possibly hallucinating or in some bad place mentally and trying to end that versus trying to improve it. I don't think people should need to be on mood altering medication unless they have an actual mental disorder. I'm not saying there's never time for it, or there's never a place for being on mood altering drugs if you don't have a diagnosed disorder. But so many people flee to these drugs not because they actually need a drug to be themselves and to be the person they should be, but because their lifestyle does not support them being the person they should be. And so it'd kind of be like somebody who's obese taking drugs because they're depressed. If they're depressed because they're obese, they should be working out. They should be, it's crazy what everything good that happens when you do workout 30 minutes a day, exercise, whatever. How much happier people are, seasonal depression. If you just get outside and do something, it's crazy how much that boosts their mood naturally without needing all these chemical substances that you can quickly become hooked on and that can damage your body.
Maybe because they're chewing some psychedelic grass or something.
It's possible.
It's definitely why it
Watch
works.
out for what you're chewing in nature, fellas.
So another question I would have is, are DMT and other psychedelics addictive? Do we have any
No,
research on that?
they are not.
Addictive.
They're not physiologically addictive. I
Okay.
believe that's the word.
You sure it's not chemically?
I'm pretty
We
sure it's
cut this part.
physiologically addictive.
Okay, here's the deal. Addiction is a physical thing as well as can be a mental thing, right? So I think the physical side of addiction is the chemicals released when you do whatever said addiction is, right?
Yeah, it's the
Like-
dopamine that tends to
Right,
be
like
hooked.
dopamine or whatever, the nicotine that might give
Okay,
you...
here's a quick AI-assisted synopsis of it. Psychedelics are generally not considered addictive as they do not typically cause physical dependence or cravings. However, some users may develop psychological dependence using them repeatedly to escape reality or for other reasons. So in general, they're not considered addictive. And that's why people do them as treatments to get off addictive chemicals that they're using to treat their other, maybe to treat their mood swings. They'll do psychedelics and then they'll get off all these other chemicals, which I think is an incredibly good thing.
Right, so I think some of it just comes back to the fundamental principles. When God created the world, what did he say was good, right? I think from
Everything?
my Christian standpoint, he created everything as being good. but that was in all its original state of use. That was before Adam and Eve took said apple or whatever fruit this was. And
Orange, definitely.
Orange, definitely an orange, whatever. It didn't indicate any peeling, so I would argue maybe it was a fruit you didn't eat. Actually, back then they could probably eat the peels. So I would say God created everything to be fundamentally good, and it was misused, right? So the question is not so much, is it fundamentally bad? No. I think it's more about how are we using it. So if you're using it to overcome some other addiction, possibly it could be a good thing. However, it cannot become the new addiction. And the big thing with addictions really is, if we're talking about addictions, is they are not the problem, they're the solution to the problem. People on addictive things generally are using them as a solution to some other problem. And that's why I'm saying it's
That's
not
fair.
good to be addicted to things, because you're using it as a solution for some other problem that you could probably change in a more productive way.
Any other last thoughts about psychedelics in general, and especially the morality of using them? I don't know. I still couldn't convince our pastor to fund a youth trip to Mexico to try them out to make us more spiritually aware.
So as much as this sounds like a good Sunday school boy, spiritual awareness starts at home.
This home, or are we being specific here?
I don't think we have to be specific here now.
Do you want to enhance your spirituality and your sense of maybe spiritual things by using psychedelics?
Well, and that's where I'm saying
Well, you don't
think
need
you
to, so
need
what's
to.
the point? Or...
I don't think it's a legitimate positive spiritual thing, and therefore I don't think you want that you need to or should.
Okay,
I don't
that's
think there's
fair.
any
That's
obligation to do it, and I guess it's up to everyone if they think they should not do it. I'm not here to make that judgment call for people, but I really don't think it's not what I'm shooting for.
Okay.
I don't think the
Let's
fundamental
wrap this thing. Yeah, let's wrap.
principles are there for it.
Okay, Doug, you want to hit us?
Well, guys, thanks for listening. We're going to have to wrap here. As you can see, it's a fascinating and controversial subject, and I'm not sure that we covered a lot of it, but that's what we had time for. We are on Amazon Music, Spotify, and Telegram. If you want to check us out, if you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with a friend.
And like always,
Be
Be
careful
careful
out
out
there.